Do you know what would be good? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the last day, I believe it is the last day of the GAC conference, virtual conference. And this is actually the last session of the AI track, which is a shame. But hopefully in person, there'll be a lot more speakers, which we are really hoping for. But today we have Dave Lee, which is brilliant, which I will introduce him probably in a minute. Just allow people to join, so we'll give them 5 minutes to do so. Do you know what would be good in these just waiting periods? Like some music, like a little bit of music, just to kind of speed up the process.
You're giving yourself a job there, Al. Well done.
I'm gonna kick myself going back through the recordings and people
Yeah.
point out I said that. So we're thinking if there's quite a few people, should we leave the mics off or should we unmute them still? What are you thinking?
It's fine. Doesn't matter. Yeah, I said I've done this already at the working group this deck, and it's meant to kind of have some audience participation and questions and things. So it's better if we have mic off unless there's a load of background noise from someone.
Okay, perfect. So you heard Dave. If you'd like to, please turn off your mic, and if you have anything to contribute or ask a question, please just speak up, and then we'll go from there during the presentation. And if not, please just leave the question to the end, and we're good to go.
Brilliant. Okay. Right, let's get going. So, yes, thanks everyone for coming along. So this session is how we can use AI and user behavior for better security monitoring. So I did have an intro. Okay, there's my introduction slide. So here's the agenda, what we're going to be talking about today. So we kick off with why security needs artificial intelligence. Very high level overview of types of artificial intelligence. So if we do have anyone working in the AI area or any SMEs, I do apologise. It's a 10,000 foot view. It's not a deep dive in any way whatsoever. I'm going to look through one type of AI, which is rules-based AI, and we're going to kind of look at the steps of how you can implement that on the mainframe with a security use case. I'm going to look at how AI actually improves the security posture. So let's talk about how you might do it, and then let's look about really the end result of what would happen if you implemented it and the kind of the fruit of putting that effort in. We can look to the future and kind of see where the direction of AI might be going, non-mainframe specific, but security in general, and kind of look to maybe a bit of a look to the future for where the platform might be going. Because I think there's one thing we can probably all agree on: AI is going to have a story in this space one way or another. We're not going to be able to avoid it. And then just finish up with a brief summary of what I've spoken about. So who am I? So my name is David Lee. I'm in the product management team at BMC Software in the AMI security pillar. I've been on the mainframe for 10 years. So worked in the managed service team and moved into the security engineering team. Then in 2022, I moved into product management. So I was previously with RSM Partners, and I came into BMC through that acquisition. So to kick off with section one. So why security needs artificial intelligence? So just to kind of set context, so kind of a pioneer of our time, Stephen Hawking. So success in creating AI would be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last unless we learn how to avoid the risks. Kind of my leading into this is a massive opportunity. It's something we can't avoid, we can't miss, but we've got to be careful with how we do it. I think in an area like security, and the fact that it might be the control, the last digital control before a physical event or something like that, it's never truer. So a question, I know it's 9 a.m. UK time, but if anybody on the call does want to talk, please do get involved. But should we be concerned? Okay, so yes, we should be concerned, but as I touched on the last slide, sorry, please. Yeah.
Okay, so I think on that slide, a bit slow on the up, yeah, a bit slow because it's quite early. So I was going to say, Yeah, you'd want faster horses, but wouldn't you want also to make sure the stirrups didn't come off halfway through the gallop?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think we kind of where I'm going with this kind of play with Henry Ford is, yeah, we absolutely should be concerned, like, but we can't afford to be left behind, as a security space and as a platform. I think we kind of know the history of the platform, and we possibly dropped the ball with kind of this predicted demise of the mainframe kind of thing. We're playing catch up in terms of skills gap, and from a technology perspective, we're well ahead, and keeping up with everything else. But we've had that 20-year lull, and reeling for it with the skills gap, and we can't afford to do that again. So AI is coming to the platform, and we definitely need to take advantage of it. And the security space, absolutely. The one big thing that you do want to highlight is a lot of physical events now. Think of something maybe being launched, or a train or a ship or anything like that. Kind of military kind of events do spring to mind. They often have a digital control, whether that's approval or a launch or something like that. What we don't want is AI to possibly be in control of something like that. So we've got to get that kind of ethical balance between the two, but it's definitely important. So the landscape is always changing. So all attacks have one thing in common. They all have a footprint. That footprint kind of will start with a user ID of some sort, whether that be a human user ID or an application ID. We can all footprint an attack. So it is, and the fact that we can footprint it and they all have one thing in common, it does give us hope that we can start trying to keep up with that landscape always changing, as we can kind of start trying to track it and monitor it from that perspective. Known vectors are useful, but they're not really good enough to kind of protect everything. So if we start looking at known attacks and things like that, we can put static controls in place to protect against those. So if that's looking for ACI modification or something like that, a very mainframe specific way of elevating privileges, that's useful, and we can track that and we can alert to it happening and things like that. But how do we start tracking things that are unknown to us? The 0 day, the user that has permission to do something, but their user ID has been hijacked and they're now doing something unusual. Behavior analysis can really help obscure this kind of thing. Business technology. So not only is it changing from a technology standpoint and a technical standpoint, but the business needs change as well. New technologies adopted. Anyone who attended our threat security session on Tuesday, we talk about kind of some of the big breaches in our industry, the Logica, Nordea, and a few other very well known and documented ones. But the mainframe is a system of record, but it's not always the system you interact with directly. Your mobile app on your bank does not go directly to the mainframe. It's going through an open system. That open system has permission to read data from the mainframe. And when that new technology comes in, you're only as secure as you are that gateway. Keeping up with that and being able to detect that from our side on the mainframe, it's very tricky. And AI goes a long way to helping with that and keeping pace with changes in the enterprise. The other one is business process as well. We all have worked at kind of big shops where the consultancy will come in. Some are better than others. Some put in very good processes and make us more robust. Others come in with the goal of cost cutting. If that cost cutting exercise is done, that may mean compromising security. So the process needs to be tested against your security and to make sure it doesn't leave any holes. A big one I can think of, for an example, is that I was working for a large retailer a few years ago, and you had permission to request a signed certificate, but there was no approval process other than you had permission to request a signed certificate. So myself and my manager at the time, we worked out that one of the API was doing certificate authentication, and that authentication was done. That certificate was signed with a CA that was one we could request a new certificate from, because it wasn't unique to that API. So we requested a certificate signed by this CertAuth, and at that point we could then take over that REST. We could authenticate to that REST API. That REST API was controlling the JML process. So at this point, we're not even a mainframe hacker. We just needed to have understanding of a REST API, authentication using the certificate, and then use some sort of burp tool or something like that to map that API, and we'd have been able to get whatever we wanted, and that could have been very quickly and very simply. So user behavior as a vector is very difficult to secure against using static indicators of compromise and indicators of attack. So an indicator of compromise, an indicator of attack. So an indicator of attack might be that you're getting loads of reads on data sets, something like that. And an indicator of compromise might be that you start having like a denial of service or something like that, or messages going crazy in a catalog and those kinds of things. So they are your last line of defense. So they should not be your security posture. They should be your last filter before anyone has a go at attacking your system. So when we put in a ID, this user ID has elevated, that should be the last line of defense. We shouldn't be relying on that solely. We should be trying to look at that user's behavior before we get there. User behavior learning. We need to baseline what our user's normal is. If we just use the static vector, a user's normal isn't taken into account. So if we take a very privileged ID, they may not be doing things throughout the year that they do once a year. However, we would not flag if they were doing other points in the year. So a good example here, I guess, would be a master key change. A master key change going on outside of a key ceremony would be absolutely catastrophic, especially if it's done poorly or incorrectly. However, we should be able to pick that up, but based on static controls, we're not going to pick that up because they have permission to do that. So user behavior, baselining what's normal. Is it normal for this time of year? We really need to put that extra layer of protection and security intelligence and using AI above our static controls. And on to the second point, just because the user has permission does not mean they should be. I think Rakev's been around, is it since 72? Off the top of my head, it predates me by decades, I know that. By being around that long, it means we've got the most security technical debt as well. Some shops are very good at dealing with this, others have never dealt with it. Like I said, often when a new user joins in a shop without an RBAC or robust JML processes in place, they'll just take the copy of someone else doing their role, and if that person has been with that organization for 30 plus years, they can have a lot of permissions that, one, they don't need, two, overlap with roles that they've had in the past and overlap with their current role and make toxic combinations. As I said, just because they've got permission, it doesn't mean they should be doing it. Doing a full permissions review on a user is a really costly process, and a lot of shops just don't do it. And be that skills, resource, whatever, there's loads of reasons why it hasn't happened, but it doesn't. Having a dynamic layer of protection. So analyzing user behavior in real time using algorithms and mathematical formulas. So that landscape always changing. This kind of comes into that with that user behavior. We need to move with the user as well throughout their kind of career and their time on the mainframe. So, like I said, just because a user does something new, we should flag it, but it doesn't mean it was nefarious. It needs to be investigated and then become a new normal. And then if it's not their normal, obviously react to that. Something I'll talk out later through the deck, but false positives need to be accounted for. The biggest challenge, in my opinion, with AI on the mainframe, when you start giving the machine permission to do things and to give insights and that kind of stuff, it is false positive. If you implement some sort of artificial intelligence when it comes to security and your false positives cause something catastrophic, it's not ever going to have trust in the organization again. And that needs to be accounted for organization by organization base, or on organization by organization basis. Most organizations are having kind of AI ethics committees put in place and this kind of thing. And there's also talk of, I think it's like a CIAO now, so Chief AIO, so Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer, so kind of a C-level role as well, sitting on boards of big companies and things. So it's all kind of got your appetite for it needs to be taken into place and kind of, take worst case scenario. That needs to be taken into account for how an organization might use this. A user elevating their permissions, knocking them off the system, and maybe causing them a 30-minute downtime while they're getting the ID back because it was okay what they were doing. It was deemed that's probably going to be acceptable. Taking out online banking using AI automatically in response to something, yeah, needs some controls in place. And flagging suspicious behaviour. So we need to identify and auto respond to suspicious behaviour before malicious actions are executed. So this is kind of the extra layer I'm talking about above the last line of defence. So we take out indicators of compromise, indicators of attack. It's thing that looks like files are being encrypted, those kind of things, some rock solid indicators that we need to act because there's something bad going on the system. Ideally, we want to react to it before we get there. And baselining a user's normal is a great way to do this. If we challenge kind of some of the breaches that we know about, and we play those back against having a user's baseline normal, factored in again with other tighter security controls such as MFA, a lot of these attacks could have been avoided, or thwarted, I should say, rather than avoided. It goes a long way towards combating the lone wolf. So I think one of the biggest challenges in security on any platform is the lone wolf. In my mind, the easiest way to get into a system isn't to breach it or to have a 0-day or any of that kind of thing. Is to get someone else who has the permissions on the system to do your dirty work. That is what I'm kind of terming the lone wolf. The lone wolf can come for many reasons. And how do we protect against the inside bad actor? So 1, they have permissions to do the things in most cases. 2, they're human and life happens. 3, they know where the bodies are buried in the system. So even if they don't have permission, they may know how to elevate their permission, and they will know the quickest way to cause harm to an organization, or the quickest way to go get data, or the fact that they may have been with the organization a long time. They've footprinted things throughout their role without flagging any suspicion, and they've learnt the process. There's the famous breach, or kind of the money being stolen from a bank in the UK, and that was through knowledge of a process and a broken process within the bank, and ended up stealing millions of pounds. Life happened. Your trusted employee, they didn't set out to necessarily be a bad actor. They didn't come from a nation state and get posted over and go through education with this long-term goal of causing damage to another nation. Debt, social engineering, blackmail, health, mental health, all these things can factor and make them a victim of their situation, to the point where they end up being a perpetrator and making some bad decisions. When we think about anyone in the UK in the news recently, there's been a scandal with an MP who made some poor decisions, ended up being blackmailed, and made some poorer decisions on the back of those blackmails rather than seeking help. It happens. Everyone's vulnerable to this, and no one knows when it's coming. Each user needs to be looked at individually. So, like I say, when we look at the wider system, take your operations or your performance, we can look at the system as a whole and kind of see it from a bigger view and say, this is where we're going. So we're having CPU spikes, user behavior and user activity on a system. Every user needs to be looked at individually. So one user's normal is another user's breaching the system and footprinting. This amount of data to trawl through and bring out useful insights doing this way is nearly impossible to do without some sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning. But if there's any questions throughout, please do speak up and interrupt me. I'm happy to take questions throughout. False positive. So they are the biggest challenge with artificial intelligence. They hamper trust. If trust is broken, the events are ignored, your fancy new machine learning algorithm that's in place is as good as useless without trust. Needle in a haystack. It can also have the other effect is it can produce too much data. So we start looking at these insights, and if those insights aren't useful, you start filtering and maybe putting high, medium, low. If you don't put that kind of thing in place for a user that says, okay, I'm only going to pay attention to the high alerts coming out of it. Needle in a haystack scenario, it can result in a second layer of filtering having to be done, and this is broken by design. I think we've all been in scenarios where we've kind of ran a report and we've got a ton of data, so we run another report against that report, to cut down that data. In an AI model, having this kind of approach, it's broken by design. We should be able to get those insights out with the first pass. And business damage. So we've already spoken about the auto response. It said, revoking a user who's clearly doing something that is a big suspicion is likely going to be, there's going to be appetite for that, and that is okay. Yeah, taking off your online batch or something, or shutting down the network for the mainframe, or even keying the system or something as extreme as that. If that's done on the back of a false positive, that's not going to be acceptable. So we've got to put measures in place and process in place to make sure this is done in kind of a useful way. But more importantly, to the fact that it improves your security posture and allows operations to go on without little to no interference. And really, it's no interference rather than even little. So section 2 of the talk, types of artificial intelligence. And these are just a couple of sample ones I've picked. So this is very much like an artificial intelligence 101, really. So yeah, anyone familiar with any sort of AI, please do close your ears, because this is going to be almost offensive. I've made it that simplified. So AI, are we using it in our daily life? Yes, is the answer. So in the US, 50% of mobile users are using voice search every single day. Behind voice search is artificial intelligence. That's on mobile phones. So we're thinking Siri, Cortana, and then in your house you've got kind of the Google platform, Google Home, and then Alexa and things like this. I mean, this figure was from 2023 or 2022. I would think that figure is far higher by now. It's becoming part of daily life, and even if we don't think we're interacting with directly, there's a lot of interaction in the background that's going on, shopping habits, all that kind of stuff. AI is absolutely part of our life. It's influencing our life, whether we know it or not, whether we want it or not, and whether we're using it directly or not. It's there, it's happening, and it's not going anywhere. So first one to talk about is supervised learning. Excuse me. So supervised learning, it's good. It's training data you give it. The data contains both the input and the desired output data. So this is known ins and knowns out. So talk through an example of this. So this model is when the live output is predicted based on the learning, the input and the output data. So this is saying, I know if this person goes to the shop, they will normally buy this. That then becomes their kind of normal input and output data. So that might be me at my lunchtime going for my meal deal from Sainsbury's. If I'm in Sainsbury's at midday, the likely is I'm going to get a meal deal. So it's based on kind of truthful events. But another one that we're going to all be familiar with is email filtering. So input is good emails, and then output is emails tagged as genuine or spam. So the model is applied to live inboxes to detect spam. So if we look at your inbox and we see an email that looks like other people have tagged it as spam, then it's going to go to the junk folder. If it looks like a genuine email, it's going to pass through and you're going to interact with it normally. And then it's important in any kind of model that there's continual learning going on. So an email is a great one. So think of Gmail, when you tag it as spam, that's going back to their model. And then that helps all of us by keeping junk out of our inboxes. So it's continually learning. Second one is unsupervised learning. So the trained data contains inputs only. So it finds a structure in the data and it groups them into clusters. Commonalities between these are identified in the clusters, and by default, the absence of commonalities is also identified and found in other clusters. So there are some issues with this. This is kind of a bit more closer to your deep learning models. As there's no trusted output, it can yield some questionable results. So this has resulted in things like racist models, misogynistic models, and also some kind of quite scary Skynet-esque kind of things. So a model might learn that the CEO has the keys to the kingdom and the most power in an organization and authority. So they impersonate that role, for example. So it can get quite scary. Bit of a personal story. I had a friend of mine who's working on a natural language model to take kind of orders for a restaurant. In their training model, they used a rather right-wing newspaper, and the model was racist. So it kind of said, yeah, you can't book a table here because I've picked up that you might be from this country, which they had to quickly kick out of the model. But that is part of unsupervised learning. So But obviously, when you apply it to a real world scenario, it can come up with some very questionable things. An example of this is supermarket buying patterns. So the input is what shoppers are buying. This person normally buys this set of things. And then the pattern identifies things like that. If eggs are purchased, so is bacon. And this has a real world impact of one, things like when you go to your online shopping, suggested items comes from this, one from your own buying habits, but also from other people's. And also you can drive things like store layouts and stuff like that. So how can we get the most revenue out of our patrons? They're putting their most purchased items at opposite ends of the store. Anyone in the UK, and I'm sure international, this is unique to the UK, but your bread, milk, and eggs are normally at the four corners of the supermarket. So you have to do the full tour, and I know I for sure will definitely be buying things from the special offers at the end of the aisles as I walk through the store. Al, I think we've got a chat. Can you field that, please? I can't go to it with my full screen.
Yes, of course I can. So, Colin Knight.
Yeah.
If it worked, wouldn't beer be next to sausages and crisps?
Just a thought, David.
Oh, well, yeah,
It's
I
not. It's
quite
not.
agree.
It's not as accurate as it could be. That's what I'm saying, really.
I think they're probably putting those deliberately not next to each other to get you to buy all the other stuff in between as well. So I think if you're buying something like that, Colin, they're probably going to put anything that your partner might want in between as well. So yeah, it's a good point. And then rules-based. So rules-based AI. So training data. So this data is collected during a trusted learning period. So the idea of rules-based is to baseline kind of a normal. And this, so in the context of this slot, we're talking about user behavior largely, but this normal can be applied to anything. That can be driving habits, shopping habits, anything. It's what is normal for this set of data and the entities that represent that set of data. So the model, so baseline is normal from the learning period, and it can perform an action based on that criteria. An example of this is Netflix. So it creates a knowledge base on things that you like, so long language, genre, and year. The model suggests movies to watch, so it increases engagement, and then continual training, so continually feeding into the model and making suggestions based on your viewing habits and similar users around you. So yeah, it's something that we're interacting with all the time. So section 3 of the talk, steps of rules-based AI on the mainframe. So kind of there's 4 parts we're going to talk about. So the first one is determine average message counts per interval. It's the first thing to do. The second thing is to determine standard deviation of message counts per interval. 3 is determining the probability of the occurrence. And the 4th is reducing the probability of a ticket. So let's jump into those 4 steps and see what they look like. So determine average message count per interval. So the first thing we need to do is need to classify each message. We need to understand the data that we're ingesting and what does it actually mean, and be able to put it into some sort of category. Without that kind of tag and understanding of the data, it's pretty much useless. We need to make that data useful to us. Determine a set interval to sample. So this needs to align and account for spikes such as maintenance windows or installs, these kind of things. So this is all about the learning period. So this needs to be of a period, maybe 3 months, 6 months. You ideally want to account for things like your Black Friday spike. If you're a retailer, you want to include a maintenance window, possibly a DR test, something like that. So anything that's going on in your users' kind of day-to-day job, you really want to try and get a big sample of that. Otherwise, when it kind of comes around to them doing something abnormal, but they have permission to, so yeah, master key change is one I like to talk about because it happens possibly on an annual basis. If your learning period doesn't include that master key change, you're going to start getting a load of alerts for abnormal behavior, that kind of thing. So it's got to be thought about, and ideally kind of tied into how the business runs. You need to set counters based on the message classification. So this user is normally doing this many logins during this day, and obviously that login is represented to the model by a certain message that's coming through. And we need to understand how to catch anomalies, such as no messages. So you have said one problem with the learning period is if a user's maybe on something like long leave or maternity leave or something like that, we've got no messages for that user, it's not really acceptable for them to log on and then they'll have a flurry of messages saying no, loads of abnormal behavior detected, because that scenario is absolutely fine. So that's things like flagging users and putting them back through the relearning period manually outside of kind of the implementation for the wider enterprise. Number two, so we've now got our baseline of normal. So we've collected in our learning period, we've said, right, the user does this many times normally on this frequency during these hours, all that kind of stuff. So we've now collected our normal data. So the second thing we need to do is determine the standard deviation. So based on the normal or baseline, determining step one, consistently calculate the deviation away from this. So this is that kind of what is acceptable to be away from that normal as kind of regular behavior, because no user behaves the same every single day. They do deviate slightly. So 0 means there's no deviation. Negative means the message count is below the normal. And then positive means the message is above the normal. So that's one interesting thing about user behavior. Yeah, we can respond to our normal behavior, but we can also flag up abnormal behavior as well. So a user ID that's been going absolutely crazy for the last 3 months and loads of activity on the system, if they suddenly start doing nothing and they're not on a holiday period or anything, that could mean that ID has been compromised and been used by a bad actor. It turns out that ID moved department 3 months ago anyway, so that ID should be being redundant and revoked. So it's kind of a double-edged sword with this one. Number three, determining the probability of occurrence. So this step aims to determine if the deviation, be that negative or positive, is improbable and therefore anomalous. If anomaly is determined, so abnormal behavior, then it needs to be investigated. Not only does it need to be investigated, that anomaly based on the message type, you might have appetite that it should be immediately responded to. So if a user doesn't normally elevate their ACI, we might just auto respond to that and revoke the user. It's a very extreme use case, but it's it's a good one because it's one where I think most have appetite to just automatically respond with a revoke to that scenario. An example of this is a user's login message rate is spiking. They usually have no more than 3 incorrect logins. Anomalies detected, continue to step 4. And the big thing, reducing the probability of a ticket. So we've got to the point where we say, yeah, we've identified an anomaly. We want to do something with this, but we've got to put a safeguard in place. It comes back to that false positive scenario. If we don't get this bit right or pretty tightly tuned, we're going to lose completely. You're going to lose confidence in confidence and trust in the system. So the actions could be revoke a user, turn on session recording, kills a user session, and open an ITSM ticket or alert the SOC. The goal of this step is to reduce false positives to ensure anything flagged is actionable and accurate. The fact that you've kind of got multiple options of how to respond to a scenario also kind of, so we talked about kind of the business side of things and the ethical side of things with AI. Kind of opening a ticket is a much softer approach. Turning on session recording is a much softer approach. Revoking a user, a bit more extreme, and killing a user session, also a bit more extreme. And by killing a user session, sorry, obviously I know you literally kill their address space. Then also you can look to do things like closing the port for that user and that kind of thing for the IP address they're coming off. And the false positive, it's imperative that there's confidence in the solution. This step builds on the previous 3 steps and sets the thresholds based on historical events. So again, every model needs to be continually learning and updating itself and tuning itself and getting more accurate. So part 4, how AI improves your security posture. So security overhead and insights. So the amount of data, as I said earlier in the talk, it's humanly impossible to work through the amount of data security events. And obviously for a RACF system, we're talking 80, 81s, and then 82s are a big part of that now. And then the ATF2 and Top Secret also have their events, but there's also a lot of other kind of security related events as well. So your log on prompts, your network activity, it's not just your ESM data. Although there's an amount of ESM data that would also make it humanly impossible. When we start talking about human behavior that could be considered a security insight and a potential indicator to identify malicious behavior, it's not possible to go through it. We need some sort of model to go through it, provide insights, and kind of baseline that normal, abnormal, and having a really simple flag as well. This is abnormal behavior. This is normal behavior. If we don't make it simple to digest and easy to understand, again, the model is not going to be used. The set reports, they're not dynamic, and anomalies can be missed. I think about like things like a compliance solution. The DISA-STIG is made up of like a couple of hundred reports. I used to do the compliance reports kind of 10 years ago, my first role, and my instruction at the time from the security engineer that I was reporting into was, if it looks the same as yesterday, it's probably okay. There were just too many reports to make it useful. We're talking about user behavior here, but again, applying AI to kind of your compliance as well, and looking for those insights. And it's a human sitting behind that data at the end of the day, and making those insights useful and actionable is the goal really of AI, especially with large amounts of data. AI will allow the detection and response times to decrease as well. Your alerts come through to an inbox or something like that with a static control. The person, there might be two security engineers, one might be on leave and the other person, they're on lunch. That can be a full hour before something's responded to. I don't need to tell you how quick somebody could rip through a system if they've got an hour and the correct permissions. You need auto response to certain events. Continual learning, so something to touch on the last slide again. The stronger the models become, the greater in-depth the insights will be. The finer tuned it will be, the more confidence. That cycle's got to be completely going round and round constantly. One thing to note on this continual learning is all shops operate differently. So again, these models need to be able to be tunable and thresholds set based on shop. A government organisation or a military or something like that is going to have very low tolerance for abnormal behaviour, whereas retailer might be more accepting of things because they're not they're not under the same kind of compliance standards and kind of scrutiny that they are being in different sectors. But they're also, their appetite for risk may be slightly different and that kind of thing. And then the users, they may not have permissions sitting behind elevation. They may have permanent access, things like that. So yeah, it all depends on organisation. And dynamic adaptation. So we look at the ESM at the moment, and the ESM controls, they're static. By having this kind of mechanism in place in front of the ESM controls, it creates dynamic protection. So we can react to users, bringing peace of mind, and it also provides that moving window as well. I think one thing to note is the next attack will be in development somewhere, and we don't know where it's coming from. That can be anything as extreme as a 0 day. 0 days have a footprint. They just are a 0 day. They're very hard to stop. But with things like user behavior, if a user is executing a 0 day, the fact that they've created a file under a high-level qualifier or something that you wouldn't normally know, even though they've got a 0 day in their back pocket, this kind of model can stop that. Security detection. So toil. There's a lot of time spent investigating false positives. Obviously, there is occasionally something found that, okay, there's some bad stuff going on the system, but a lot of it is just wasted time, really, and investigating normal activity. A user logging in kind of 12 times, but they're new to the organization and don't know how to use an ISPF panel is normal behavior for a new user. However, it still needs to be investigated because logging in 12 times is suspicious, but that's a static control. But if we know at an organization, our end users who might not be a mainframe, they might be, I don't know, an insurance clerk or something like that logging into the screen, we can say, well, during the first 3 months, somebody working, actually our threshold for incorrect logins goes from 12 to whatever kind of thing, or from 3 to whatever. Again, that can help toil to keep the security engineers doing what they do best, which is the hard work and hardening the system rather than investigating things like this. And automate building reports associated with an alert. So again, we take that example of someone new to the mainframe and having issues logging on. Well, if we could say, okay, we flagged this, and by the way, here's the report that goes along with it, we no longer need to start wasting time doing our forensic analysis. It's very cumbersome, trying to look for the SMF records, is it available to view, and that kind of thing. Well, okay, here's the alert, and here's the report that goes with it. Oh, okay, we can see their user ID was created. There's the ITSM ID for the user being created. So yeah, they're a valid user. Yeah, that's okay. They're logging in this number of times. Things really speed up business process that is taking up a lot of time. It's an extra layer around the ESM controls as well. So we've spoken about technical debt and things like that. Users get given the wrong permissions, these kinds of things. Puts that extra layer of protection involved. It puts that extra layer of protection into the system. So the classic use case of someone being new to an organization and they're just given their colleagues permissions. They likely don't need those permissions. Is the easiest way to clone that user. By having this kind of control in place, it gives day one after the learning period, it gives day one protection and addresses technical debt. It also helps future-proof your posture. So it can detect threats that are previously unknown and therefore unlikely to have static controls or correlations set up that can set them. So talking about these new threats that are coming in. So I think one a few years ago was Chad Rickendrud and Phil Young. They created the NJE attack. They kind of worked out that you could spoof an NJE network connection due to the fact it was unauthenticated if the link wasn't encrypted. Again, things like this could potentially protect against that, because you could say this user on the incoming connection, they don't normally do this, or particularly from that IP, and they definitely don't do it from the IP address that's being spoofed, because they only normally do it from another mainframe IP. It would provide day one protection from something like that and catch it. Any new threats that need to feed into the knowledge base. So this kind of continual process as well. So we've picked up abnormal behavior. On the analysis of that abnormal behavior, okay, we've identified a new vector being used, and let's feed that into our static controls as well. So not only have we got the dynamic protection based on the rules base, but we're also feeding our knowledge base within our organization as well and building those correlations. So we've got that static control being fed by the dynamic control with the rules base. Looking at behavior rather than permissions can provide day one protection against new technologies. So as the moving window is always happening, we've spoken not just about attacks coming in, but also new technologies. So things like containers on the mainframe, microservices, all of this stuff is on the mainframe. It's only going to get more prevalent. Having that user behavior is a really good way to provide day one protection against threats that can come through these vectors. So security response, potentially increase trust with a proven model, and it is key. With a proven model, teams will trust the outputs. This goes back to the false positives again. Intelligence around next actions. So I'm not sure about the attendees on the call, but kind of one thing to talk about with some clients is kind of the playbooks. So you've identified bad behavior, you've reacted to it, the user's been revoked, or you've cancelled their session or whatever. What do you do next? What's the right thing to do? Is it a forensic investigation? Is it to actually cancel that user altogether? Just kill the user, delete them from the system. It's intelligence around next actions as well. So you can start tagging behavior with suggested next actions. So if a user is touching a data set under their high level qualifier that they haven't touched for ages, but you think it's a bit suspicious, maybe it's a case of turning on session recording, this kind of stuff. So again, you can start, when you start chaining these things together, you start getting really useful outputs, and they'll be trusted by teams. And then forensic investigations and improving controls. So the response, so use advanced tooling associated with AI models and filters to linked to alerts. Say one of the next actions once you've responded to an event is also then the wash up to it as well. So driving root causes into hard and static controls, all of this stuff, it can be helped with an AI model. So we've looked at this user, we're confident that they're the one that was associated. Let's run a report automatically on the back of the AI model to produce the investigation report for that user. Then we can see actually the IP address they were coming in on. There was also 3 other users coming in on that IP address on that day, which was likely coincided with the release time for that IP address for the organization. You can start uncovering bigger kind of goings on with the organization, driving root causes, and really, again, this feedback loop of it all has to feed into static controls. So that dynamic detection needs to then become static intelligence. So section 5 of the talk. So that's kind of the mainframey bit now. Kind of I'm well ahead of time. So we've got 15 minutes still. So I look to the future and where things might be going from a security space. This is not mainframe specific, and just kind of more just some of my thoughts. So please do take it with a pinch of salt. So what next? So skills gap. automate even the most complex tasks. Compliance, use generative AI to write the queries of new frameworks to allow for day one compliance benchmarking. So DIFID, they produced their whatever version 9 of the controls. Let's put a generative AI model against those and see if we can write the queries for whatever solution we're using, and let's see how quick we can be compliant against it. But also let's do the gap analysis between the old model and the new model as well, using an AI model rather than kind of a manual effort. Let's see, actually, our posture, we're kind of 98% covered already. So let's just focus on those couple of high ones. So all of this can drive into kind of business process and things like that. Behavior analytics, I've spoken enough about that one, but making those models ever more complex. One of the big things about behavior analytics, it's always kind of the rules base. It's done on associations, so a user, time logged in, these kind of things. What about putting some deep learning against our archive data? So we've got FMF data that might go back several years. Let's just apply deep learning to those and see what kind of complex associations can come out of those deep learning models. So I personally don't think deep learning is applicable to real-time user behavior. I think the fact that we're looking at users case by case, there isn't enough data coming through, whereas you can something like RMF on a system by system basis. Each user individually is very hard to bring out those complex insights. But looking at users as a whole on archive data over a long period, you might be able to bring out some insights that then can drive into your associations and again into your improving your security posture. Defensive cyber operations, not something we talk about much on the mainframe, but something I covered at university was programs attacking programs. So running binaries and looking at what else is running on the system and going and attacking those systems. So taking a look at the running code, looking for maybe a vulnerable instruction or some outdated code that's got some vulnerabilities in it. The classic Buffett overflows in, is it printf in C? I can't remember, or one of the reading. It's stuff like this, looking for those and then automatically, programmatically writing a buffer overflow to then overtake that program, take their permissions, these kinds of things. With AI, this is very much coming, and in the open systems, this is something that is already there. Adaptive autonomous security. So as trust evolved, let's go beyond the auto respond and this idea of becoming self-healing, self-compliant. So put AI in the driving seat. So a scary thought and definitely kind of Terminator-esque. But there's no reason we can't go that way as these models become more trusted. Again, I personally feel there should be some pretty tight controls when there's a real event in terms of the human world. So the military one comes to mind. I don't think AI should be able to launch a missile ever in our lifetime, if at all in human history. But there are definite events that AI can completely take the driving seat, and they are very real use cases where that is fine and good to do so. We're not there yet, and particularly from a security perspective, but as these models become more evolved and tuned, that's a real possibility we can look for in the future. So that's me done. So it's 50 minutes. So I've spoken to you about why we need artificial intelligence, types of artificial intelligence, steps of rules-based AI on the mainframe, how it improves your security posture, and then just a look at some few futures. Futures, those missing, but just a few fun ones to talk about. Any questions?
So that was brilliant, Dave. So yeah, the chat's open for questions, and also if you do have a question and you just want to unmute yourself and just say it, that would be perfect. Just one thing from Colin Knight: AI only gets the driving seat when they pass the driving test. That's really good. I like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi David. That's a really good session. Really enjoyed that.
Thanks, Colin.
What I'd like to ask, I guess, is it's the obvious questions with AI. You've got the whole sort of model building and decision making has got to be so transparent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And even then, there's not many organizations today that would stick AI in a driving seat for security kind of events without some sort of trigger and some human eventually saying yes or no or rubber stamping it. So I think we're a long way, and indeed, like driving cars, AI is a long way from taking over that driving seat, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of, the thing is, like, it is when we talk about it, like in the Skynet scenario, the Terminator, the robot doing the security of the system. But at the moment, organizations do use auto response, and that is AI doing it. So, based on this scenario, automatically respond to this. Although there's no kind of in-depth learning and it's based on a static human state control, we are happy to let the machine do things for us. Well, it's obviously not based on a learning period. There are some stuff going on there already, but I think that comes back to this idea of things like the CAI, Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer, and ethics boards and things like this. It's a top-down approach, and ultimately that will filter down into security. Is that a new term to people, this idea of a CAIO? So I'm really struggling to get that word out. A C-level, someone at a C-level who is the artificial intelligence officer for an organization. Has anyone heard of that before?
I hadn't heard of it, to be honest,
Yeah.
but I haven't looked for it, and I suspect in most organizations there's somebody that's acting in that role, even if it's not official. So yeah, I definitely think that's it's got to be there, hasn't it? Somebody's got to take that, have a department or section that takes those decisions and says, what we can and can't do with AI.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially when you take an organization and vendors are putting it into their products, kind of thing. And the idea is you've had this product before, so it's trusted and it's used, and it's everyone's happy with it, and no issues about continuing to use it. But when you put something like AI into that product becomes very different, and not just from we'll still be performing the same job, but there'll be no kind of screening that should we use the AI in that product at the moment. It's just be accepted. Yeah, it's new functionality. Let's go for it. Let's use it. That's quite a tricky one. It's feels a bit like a backdoor at the moment, because you are massively changing how an organization works, and that is being vendor led at the moment. If you've already got that product, it's new functionality. Yeah, of course we should utilize it. I don't think that's probably the right approach. I think it needs to be a C-level decision down, and anything that has AI in it almost needs to go through that kind of review process and challenge against a set of ethics, definitely. But we're not interested in that. We're interested in the cool stuff on this session. Auto response killing session, taking the mainframe offline automatically. That's the fun stuff, not the ethics. So, any other questions?
I don't believe so.
Okay, real. So just kind of just some thoughts on talked about these associations. So some kind of things you could associate a user with for this kind of rules-based AI. So users and MQQs, users and KICS transactions, users and data sets, users and LPAR terminal, time logged in, DB2, the DBID that they normally interact with, these kinds of things. And you can even go further than this and start associating a user with certain screens and that kind of stuff. So just some kind of thoughts on things you might associate a user with, the baseline, then normal. Thank you very much. Oh, I've left Dave's email. I did this talk previously. It was a joint talk, so Dave became one of my colleagues. But thank you very much all for attending. And there's my email if you want to reach out with any questions. Great to have so many people on at 9 o'clock in the morning. So thanks very much all for joining. Could I also ask you all please to do the feedback? So session code is 3M. It'd be great to have your thoughts on the session anonymously, and that will come back to me through Al.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Dave. I mean, I think it was an excellent session as well. Really interesting.
Thanks,
like Dave said, please do your feedback. 3M is our virtual room. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your days, everyone. And yes, that is the end of the AI track. Thank you so much, everyone. And Dave, I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, thanks all. Cheers, Al.
Thank you.